Good morning, folks. Good morning. Pat Brosnan, live from the Batcave, 30 feet underground, somewhere in Gotham. Likely a nondescript building, but you're not going to find out where it is. I can tell you that much. But anyhow, good morning. Good morning. I have with me today a special friend. I tried to figure out how many years we know each other, and I got a headache, so we've been around together a long time. But it's my absolute honor to introduce one of New York's most legendary, battle-hardened, and fiercely respected criminal defense attorneys. The
Pat, you made me blush.
Thomas, I don't believe you can blush, and neither can I. The introduction is to the incomparable Thomas Gerard Cassione. He is a razor-sharp former prosecutor in the Bronx District Attorney's Office, where he spent years locking up the worst of the worst. Tom crossed the aisle and became an absolute titan at the defense bar as founding partner of Cassione, Persigliotti, and Galuzzi. There's a mouthful for you.
Pronunciation.
He has litigated well over 100 hard-fought jury trials and taken nearly 100 criminal cases to verdict, delivering stunning, not guilty victories, murder cases, rape, robbery, arson, major narcotics, and racketeering cases across the 5 boroughs, the federal courts, and beyond. A tremendous and unwavering supporter of law enforcement across all agencies, Tom has proudly served for many, many years as general counsel to the New York State Shields, making him the ultimate champion and fierce protector of New York's law enforcement community and the rule of law. When everything's on the line, there's simply no one more respected, more experienced, or more devastatingly effective than Thomas Gerard Cassione. Tom, good morning.
Good morning, Pat. Thank you very much for that heartfelt introduction. I think people probably say, well, if he's a defense attorney and a police attorney at the same time, how does that work? And I always say, look, if a cop really does something wrong, you go after him. If they don't, you stick up for them. And that's where I think the system is going wrong.
Oh, I couldn't have put it better, Tom. And it was no greater, and there has been no greater advocate for officers who get caught in the whirlwind of policy and politics and agenda-driven ideological prosecutions, indictments, and so forth. And you have always been there for them. And I have to say, you stand amongst rarefied airspace. And this case at hand, the Sergeant Erik Duran sentence, which just came down last week regarding the cooler tossing. Let me start off with Tom. Sergeant Erik Duran, the real man and the officer behind this. Why do so many in the NYPD call him a true Bronx hero with his flawless record?
Well, first of all, as we know, it's not easy to have a flawless record in the NYPD. There's so many things that can trip you up along the way. But it's not just that. This was a very, very active cop. If you look at it, they say he had 50 gun collars. Now, that's a lot of gun arrests. I mean, even in the old, street crime unit, which just went out there looking for guns, racking up 50 by one officer is exemplary. This is a very active cop. I mean, people don't realize in a good year in NYPD, sir, maybe seizes 5,000 weapons citywide. So and say there's 2/3 of the cops are actually on the street from time to time doing arrests. That's still like 1 in 4 cops gets a gun arrest.
Right.
This guy had 50. And he didn't just go to narcotics. And we know a lot of officers go to the narcotics units to get their street work, their investigatory work, to move up to detective. That's a very common career path. This guy went there and stayed there and worked it. And that's a tough job. That's a job where you're in the street every day with bad guys and you never know how it's going to go. And he did it day after day, racking up his arrests and serving the police department and the public. This was a hero.
No, Tom, it's amazing how deeply knowledgeable you are about the inner workings of the NYPD. Yes, you're 1,000% correct. And it's a fantastic piece to point out to our listener and viewership that he was not going through a career path to become a detective. He was promoted to a management rank, which is sergeant. So him staying in the streets, in the line of fire, so to speak, in narcotics, really demonstrates that he was really there on the right side of the angels, because it didn't give him any additional merit increases. It didn't give him any extra pay. He couldn't be promoted out of there. He was staying in the streets because he's just a great guy. And you nailed it. When you look at the number of weapons recovered annually throughout the NYPD, to have 50 loaded guns recovered from the street is absolutely outstanding.
And that's coming from you. And I hope your audience realizes what an amazing detective and legend you were in the department. So if you're saying this guy is the real deal, he's the real deal.
Yeah, but I give context. And thank you, Tom. I listen, myself and Fleming, Flemingway now, because he's a writer, so we call him Flemingway, ex-partner of mine. Yeah, we racked up a lot of gun collars, but let's be honest, in the rock and roll 80s and 90s, with the opening day of crack, just like Major League Baseball, it had an opening day. You were bumping into people with guns on the street. It was raining guns in certain sections of the Bronx. So we did rack up a lot of gun collars, but I mean, today it's nowhere near as violent, nowhere near as many weapons as there were back in the 80s and 90s before Rudy came in and straightened everything out, right, with Bill Bratton and Ray Kelly. So to pick up 50 pistols today, absolutely amazing. But take us straight to August 23rd, 2023, on Aqueduct Avenue over in the Central West Bronx. What exactly happened, Tom, when Eric Duprey came barreling down that narrow 5-foot sidewalk at 30 miles an hour straight at Sergeant Duran and his team? And by the way, despite published reports to the contrary, he was not on an electric bicycle. He was on a motorcycle. And I know a bit about motorcycles, as you know, and so do you. I know the difference. This wasn't the bicycle with Toto in the basket with Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. This was a 350-pound motorcycle barreling down toward the sergeant and his team. Take us through this.
Well, look, you've got what was a fairly standard buy-bust operation. And then you know how that script plays out. There's an undercover that goes on, makes the hand-to-hand. There's a team backing them up. But of course, they have to hang pretty far back or they're going to spook the whole sale. So they're watching this from afar. And these dealers, they have a system. It's funny. My son had me watching the old episodes of The Wire, and it's really exactly what happens. They have a hand-to-hand. They have a stash guy. They have a guy that takes the money. They have lookouts. They had it all that day. And Duprey was the hand-to-hand. So he's the guy that's going to catch the collar. The team moves in, because when the undercover goes off having made the buy, the team moves in, and for whatever reason, they grab the stash guy who's holding the drugs rather than Duprey, the hand-to-hand. Now, there's a system in place there, apparently, where the lookout has a motorcycle. And he goes roaring up on the motorcycle and hands it off to Duprey so he can get away. And this is a little more organized than we're even used to seeing. They really had it down. And then he makes a decision. He's going to try to get away. So he tries to go down the block. Radio car's got it blocked off. He's like, what's my next move? He decides to take it to the sidewalk. And he's heading down that sidewalk at what the expert said was somewhere close to 30 miles an hour, 28, 30. Now, I think what people don't understand is what that means. 30 miles an hour is 44 feet a second. Let's say he was going a little less, 40 feet a second. So for every second that you wait, this man is traveling at 40 feet a second towards who? At that point on the sidewalk, you have two members of the team. You have this guy, Cuevas, the bag man who they're trying to apprehend and take in custody. And you have some random bystander woman, it being the Bronx, instead of scattering, they just come over to take a look. So at that point, this guy is recklessly zooming up the sidewalk. And it is not unreasonable to believe that it's his hope that he can blast through the group on the sidewalk and get away with no regard to what harm that might cause to them. So what then occurs, and they have to realize, and we'll do it in a bit, the amount of time that Sergeant Duran has to react is so minimal that he really doesn't have a chance to think it through. And that's where he gets in a bit of trouble. And I can explain to you, but real fast, human reaction.
Well, no, not fast, Tom, because your oversight on this is critical and your insight. So what we're going to do, folks, is we're going to come apart in the break, and we'll be right back with Tom Cassione. He has deep institutional knowledge, understanding how these things transpire, as he very astutely just laid out both the timeline and the framework of what happened when he jumped on his bike and came barreling toward the team and civilians as well. So stand by. We're going to a quick break. Pat Brosnan live from the Batcave here with Tom Cassione, former prosecutor and defender of defense counsel extraordinaire. Stay tuned, folks.
Is your organization prepared for today's technology and security challenges? At CMS Technology Partners, we deliver customized, best-of-breed solutions that protect your people, your property, and your peace of mind. From AI camera vision and real-time threat detection to advanced mobile weapon screening and X-ray imaging systems, we help you stay ahead of evolving threats without replacing your entire system. Plus, our expert team builds secure, scalable IT infrastructure, network and cloud solutions designed to fit your exact needs. With over 20 years of experience, CMS Technology Partners brings the technology, service, and support your business deserves. Visit callcms.com to see how we can strengthen your security and tech, so you can focus on what matters most.
When the storm hits or when your trees need serious care, you call O'Sullivan Tree Care. O'Sullivan Tree Care is a fully licensed and insured family-owned company, proudly serving Rockland County, Westchester County, and New Jersey. Their experienced team handles it all: tree removals, precision pruning, stump grinding, crane work, and emergency storm cleanup. Fast, safe, and professional. When severe weather strikes, O'Sullivan Tree Care responds when it matters most, clearing dangerous trees, restoring access, and protecting homes and properties. They also supply high-quality mulch and screen topsoil available for pickup or delivery. You call, they haul. What sets O'Sullivan Tree Care apart is reliability under pressure. When others step back, their crew steps forward. Experienced, equipped, and ready to work in the toughest conditions. So whether you're dealing with storm damage, downed trees, or routine property maintenance, make the call to the team you can trust. O'Sullivan Tree Care, 845-359-8733. That's 845-359-8733. O'Sullivan Tree Care, where quality meets reliability and the job gets done right.
Good morning, folks. Pat Brosnan live from the Batcave, and I'm back with Tom Cassione, a defense attorney with no peer. And we are discussing the Sergeant Erik Duran case, as well as the absolute mind-blowing sentence that was handed down by Judge Guy Mitchell just last week. Tom, so the folks can understand the severity and the nightmare elements associated with the motorcycle moving, as you astutely pointed out, at roughly 30 miles an hour, is 40 feet per second, 350 pounds. And I believe Dr. Christopher Van E., one of the top biomechanical engineers in the country, analogized that motorcycle with the bad guy riding it, the dealer riding it, would be similar to a small washing machine going out a third-floor window and striking an individual. That's how horrific it would have been. Absolutely horrific. Take us through it, Tom.
It's classic physics. It's mass times velocity. And as you pointed out, as a very seasoned motorcyclist, Pat, that wasn't just an e-bike. It was a real motorcycle. Now, we have cases coming up all over the city where people get hit by e-bikes and die. Because even an e-bike, if it's going 30 miles an hour, is akin to being tackled by, an entire football team. So this motorcycle, at the speed it was going, if it connects directly with somebody, it can kill them. It could easily and would certainly seriously injure them, if not kill them. So now, as we've set the scene, the perpetrator, Duprey, is trying to get away on his motorcycle. He's made the choice to jump onto the sidewalk, and he fully well knows what's happening because he sees his compadre obviously being arrested by two officers. He knows what's ahead of him. He's got to get past that. And he's going fast enough that he clearly doesn't care what it takes to get past that. So now, Sergeant Duran there on that sidewalk. What happens is, I think they said the amount of time, the expert said, was 2.5 seconds from the time he begins to move towards the cooler until the cooler makes contact with the motorcycle. People don't understand what 2.5 seconds means. And watch it behave itself. I mean, the clock. You just go and you look and you say, all right, here we go. 2.5 seconds. We say, oh my God, what am I going to do? I have to. Time's up. That's it. By the time you make that snap decision, remember, human reaction time, 1 second. That second has gone by. He reaches the cooler, it's 2.5 seconds. That is no time to form any kind of intent. And what he does is, because let's face it, I'll give you a faster alternative. He reaches in, he takes out his weapon and shoots the guy. He could easily have done that. That would have been a lot simpler, but he doesn't. He chooses a non-lethal alternative. He thinks really fast on his feet, says, okay, I'll grab this cooler and I'll toss it, and that'll deflect the motorcycle away from the innocent civilian, the perpetrator, and the two cops on the sidewalk. That was his decision. And if you want a Sunday afternoon quarterback sit down and say, well, he could have done something differently. When was he supposed to think of that? He made a rational decision faced with a serious situation in a matter of a second. So that's how that transpired. Then what occurs is, it deflects the motorcycle. And if there hadn't been a tree in the way, motorcycle would have gone down like they go down every day. This guy would have fallen off the motorcycle. He would have gotten arrested, and this would have been over, and nobody else would have gotten hurt. But he clipped the tree. And that's nobody's fault but his own. Because if you go roaring down the sidewalk at 30 miles an hour, you're going to run the chance that you're going to clip something and go down on your bike. I mean, it's just the way it is. And so that's happened. Unfortunately, the guy hits his head and he's fatally injured. And that's how this whole thing goes down.
Perfectly stated, Tom. If the bike hadn't clipped that tree and ejected Duprey from the bike, he would have just went down like he went down many, many times before. The guy was covered with metal and pins from at least 5 or 6 prior very serious motorcycle accidents. So he was an extremely reckless, historically reckless motorcycle rider. And it's interesting because the prosecution's own medical examiner testified under oath that Sergeant Duran's ice cooler toss, which was his only option, obviously, at the time, other than pulling out his gun and shooting Duprey, actually didn't kill Duprey. It was the ridiculously high rate of speed on that crowded sidewalk. It's what killed him. Tom, how could any reasonable judge ignore that? I mean, who is this guy, Mitchell? Stevie Wonder? I mean, who is this guy?
Well, the funny thing is, Mitchell's credentials are not as bad as some judges might have been. He was a former Bronx assistant DA. He comes from up here in Westchester, where I am. Been a judge for a while. He had been, on other cases, exceedingly lenient to gang members and things like that. He was not, by far, a real tough judge. but he obviously has a leaning. He has a leaning towards the perpetrators. And unfortunately, that came out in this decision. It wasn't what he said, and I forget whether it was in terms of the facts of the case of sentencing. He goes, he did not take any fact that the officer, it was a police officer, into consideration. Now, failing to do that is an error in my opinion. And the reason for it is, and I like to think I thought of this, but this is a point my Harvard law educated son brought up to me. He's smarter than I am by a long shot. He said, look, an officer has a duty. You know, if you're a member of the public and that motorcycle flies down the sidewalk past you, you have no responsibility to do anything. And if you decided on your own volition, I got to stop this guy before it hurts somebody, and you manage to toss a cooler at him, you might face some criminal liability. Absolutely. But you're an officer, a sergeant, you're on duty. You have an obligation to protect the public. You have to step in. You don't have the right to just walk away and say, well, maybe I'll deal with this some other time. You also, of course, are doing your job, and your job was to arrest this individual, and you're allowed a certain level of force to make an arrest. You know, it can happen, and you see it happen, where an arrest occurs with some crazed individual on drugs or whatever, and no sooner they in cuffs than they have a heart attack and die. It's not your fault. You're just doing your job. Yeah, there's always a risk that using physical force to apprehend an individual that may be inclined to fight back is going to end badly. But that doesn't mean cops should never make an arrest. Otherwise, you know, what are we doing here? So I think the judge's problem is he didn't look at it through the lens of a police officer. He looked at it like any other civilian on any other day, and you can't analyze the case that way.
1,000%. And 2 points on that, Tom. And first is, I couldn't agree more with your son. Harvard educated that he is. He was a smart cookie before he went to Harvard. I know him a long time. An officer puts his hand up to the state constitution during the swearing-in process. He's testifying, he's ascribing to protect and serve the public. His duty and responsibility, it's his job.
Of course.
So the fact is, and this is critical that folks understand this, Sergeant Duran did not have an option. There was not any other option but to stop this guy, so that he couldn't, as a felon, be on the loose, so to speak. So he couldn't be out free, because we know his felonious behavior. And the fact is that he could reoffend. See, now if someone were raped, was seriously robbed or shot or killed after he had gotten away on his motorcycle, if Sergeant Duran had not thrown the picnic cooler at him, and that occurred, I can guarantee you there would be extraordinary accountability coming back to how they lost this prisoner, how they lost this target, how he escaped and had the ability to reoffend, to commit other crimes. So the responsibility was to stop him. Explain for the audience what objective reasonableness means for police officers in the eyes of the Supreme Court for the last 40 years.
Well, the basic reasonable man standard or reasonable person just goes to what some normal individual would perceive and react. You add that into, of course, a police officer, and you got to say, from the lens of a police officer, from what they're looking at, what is reasonable for them to do. And reasonableness is kind of like what common sense. It's like what would make sense. The thing is, it's not a standard of perfect, because nobody's perfect. And you're not expected to be perfect or to make the perfect choice. It's just look at the options available and whatever sounds reasonable. If you do that, you should be okay. That's not what this judge felt in this particular case, I'll tell you that.
I just don't see how I don't see how he could ignore that, because I concur. I think he looked at it through the eyes as if Sergeant Duran was a civilian, and not through the Supreme Court's decisions. But let's put that aside. Let's talk about some of the witnesses briefly. I mean, Lasso and I think it was Toralba. They swore Duran looked angry and, quote, furious when he threw the cooler. Video evidence, their own prior statements, demolished that testimony as outright perjury. How?
Number one, they're lying. That much we understand. Perhaps, I mean, we'll give them a little slack and say maybe in their head they rewrote the incident and they thought they saw things they didn't, which happens. Okay, but the fact that they're both saying the same thing tends to make me think that they're lying. And remember that again, this transpired in 2.5 seconds. So you ever heard of the term resting bitch face? There are people whose face, and I know some I know some lovely women that have that when they relax, their features relax, they relax to an angry face, an ugly face, and whatever. Who knows what kind of face you make when you're faced with the potential death of your coworkers and given an instant because some idiot decides to ride his motorcycle at them full tilt to make a decision. If he had an angry face, I don't see any relevance, because it's not like he was walking around in a fuming anger for 15 minutes before this happened. This is 2.5 seconds. So they lied. They never saw it. And if they did see it, it doesn't matter.
Correct. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. It's irrelevant to begin with. I mean, whether they lied or they didn't lie. But reality is, he started this ball rolling, Duprey. Okay? He hit a tree. There's trees everywhere. There's a 65-inch sidewalk. What else could Duran have done? I mean, it's madness. What was he supposed to do? Taser the motorcycle? Yell? I mean, I'm thinking through the options, the continuum force, right? Could he have shot him? Would have been justification to use of deadly physical force in the face of likely imminent grave danger, right? You're the textbook Article 7, right? I mean, he reacted at lightning speed with a completely unusual solution, but in brilliant in some ways, because he was able to stop the bike. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I mean, we're going to come up against a hard break, Tom, but listen, you're a former Bronx prosecutor, legendary defense attorney. Is this, and we're going to dig into it, is this one of the most outrageous you've seen in your entire career? So folks, Pat Brosnan here with Tom Cassione. We're live from the Batcave, 30 feet underground, nondescript building somewhere in Gotham. We'll be right back.
In today's world, risk doesn't announce itself. It hides in plain sight. That's where Brosnan Consulting Services comes in. Founded by industry veteran Patrick J. Brosnan, we provide risk advisory and protective intelligence solutions for individuals, corporations, and institutions that can't afford uncertainty. From due diligence and investigative consulting to strategic intelligence and protection planning, we help you see threats before they become problems. When experience matters and discretion is essential, trust Brosnan Consulting Services. Visit brosnaninvestigative.com to learn more.
Morning, folks. Pat Brosnan, live from the Batcave, here with Tom Cassione, former prosecutor, presently defense attorney extraordinaire. We're going over the facts and the fiction surrounding the Sergeant Erik Duran case and a recent, completely mind-boggling sentence by Supreme Court Justice Bronx County Guy Mitchell. Tom, you've seen it all. You've been at it a long time. Is this one of the most outrageous that you've seen in your career?
It is outrageous, and There's no question in my mind from the result that the judge had a bias that was not going to be fair. Because if you look at these facts and you really do want to convict the cop, which you're not supposed to go into that with that desire, you're supposed to be a neutral arbiter and just look at the facts. But if, say, you went in there with that bias, I believe the result from that would be a finding of criminally negligent homicide. In other words, you come up with criminal negligence and say, well, it resulted in a death. That's a step down from the manslaughter that he found. The fact that he bumped it up to manslaughter means that he really, really wanted to do this cop in. All right. Because if you were slanted a little bit and you'd say, well, okay, I think he made the wrong choice in that instant, it could be criminal negligence, and I could explain criminal negligence. It's not just normal negligence, but you could have said that. And what the result of that would have been, it would have been unfair. It would have been unjust. It would not have been as outrageous as saying manslaughter. Essentially, you're just saying this is murder light by a police officer, and it's not.
Great observation, Tom. Primneg would still have been slanted and still have been troubling, but this guy was set in his ways. He was set in his ways. I did a little research on him. He released a gang member fairly recently who had brutally murdered a 69-year-old homeless man, and he wanted to give him no time, give him a get out of jail free card. The district attorney was adamant that he had to do at least 10 years for this murder. And Judge Guy let him walk with 8 months. So he is a serious left-leaning bias, and I would say a complete preponderance of hatred for the police and to the extent of law enforcement on this matter. But let's talk about the media. Why has virtually no media outlet, not even the New York Times, reported a single word about the actual evidence and testimony that came out of trial? And I looked.
That does trouble me. In fact, it shocks me. And yeah, having done a whole plethora of cases on court TV, I'm used to the fact it's around the country.
Tommy, not to interrupt you, I had to dig deep to learn that it was actually a gas-powered motorcycle and not Dorothy's bicycle with the basket with Toto from Wizard of Oz, which they'd have you learn through the illusions of some commentary regarding the case. Nothing was out there. Nothing. Even a bike you couldn't learn about.
Yeah, I said, yeah, in most jurisdictions, a trial like this of great interest would have been covered. It would have been televised. Now, New York has a law against that. We're unusual in that extent, and I wonder if that's to protect the accused or to protect the system, because you really can't. There is nothing written about this, and I believe that somebody made a conclusion that if we put all the facts out in the media, it's going to exonerate this cop. And they haven't managed to pin a cop to the wall for murder on duty in a decade, and I guess they felt like it was time. That's all I can think of. It is amazing that there was nobody sitting in that courtroom every day and writing about it. But there was.
Unfathomable, really. And I think they wanted a scalp. Dude, I believe that's precisely what Mitchell's intent was. And now, Thomas, we head into the sentencing. Kind of actual prison exposure do you realistically think Sergeant Duran is facing in front of this judge?
I would have guessed it would be probation or a split sentence, 6 months in probation, home arrest, something like of that nature. I would have guessed, but I would have been wrong.
Wow.
We know what the sentence was now. And I can tell you, 3 to 9 years is the if you were to do a median of what sentences are for manslaughter 2, that's it. 3 to 9 is the off-the-cuff sentence for first offender man 2, with no circumstances in their favor. In other words, with no community ties, family, job, anything in their favor. He gave, not only didn't give any credit for being a police officer, he didn't give him any credit for anything. He just handed him the 3 to 9 because he knew, all right, he could have given him 5 to 10 or 6 to 12, and he knew that would have come back. That would come back because it would have been ridiculously harsh. Instead, he gave the garden variety 3 to 9 that you give a guy that kills somebody in a bar fight, and figured he can get away with that. That is so harsh. It's under these circumstances. It's so ridiculous to hand out to this public servant who's just doing his job that I'm shocked. I am.
Well, on that note, Tom, how strong, in your view, are the grounds for appeal here? And what do you think would be the strongest issues that could flip this conviction?
Well, look, there's a tough road to travel because it's a judge trial. Because it's a judge trial, and that's a clubhouse, they're very reluctant to undo the factual findings of another judge. Now, it's a damned if you do and damned if you don't, because the good citizens of Bronx County are notorious for making irrational verdicts. And had he not gone with a judge trial, he would have faced the citizens, and they might have come back with manslaughter 1, murder. I don't know. They do silly things sometimes. So you had to go with a judge, but the judge made a decision that really is hard to equate with the facts. But again, now you have an appellate court, and they're going to look at the law first before they consider the facts to that law. And that makes this appeal a tougher appeal by far. We can go into the fact what the standard is, that decision he made had to have a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the death of the perpetrator would result, or that such circumstance existed that he could have died. Anything you do to interfere with a motorcycle in motion puts the rider at risk. We know that. But what else do you do? How else do you stop this from happening unless you stop that motorcycle? You don't.
Right. What message do you have right now for every active NYPD officer who's watching this Bronx railroad job unfold?
This is a tough one. This is a tough one because, it's not the malaise that has affected the department for the past few years because of the anti-cop feelings in the city, that they don't want to get involved. But when your partners, when your team is at risk, you have no choice but to get involved. I can't advise a cop, whatever you do, don't pick up a cooler. That's a tough one. Short of applying to another department outside the city, I don't really know what to tell them now.
I wouldn't know either, Tom. I really wouldn't know the answer to that myself. It is a vexing question and a nightmare scenario, and just a horrific disservice to both, in my view, the people of the city of New York, to the extent of the good people who I hear a lot of it right now, or support Sergeant Duran, who believe that it is unjust, and certainly to law enforcement. And it is it's a real bad one. I wouldn't know what to say. And Tom, your insight and your framework of the case and your understanding on the legal side of it has been really, really helpful in putting together and understanding how the facts actually unfolded particularly your note on the 40 feet per second. I think that puts into context, as well as what is 2 seconds, to make such a life-altering decision and with no options. So I thank you. This was fantastic, very informing, very compelling. I believe we'll have a lot of questions from our listeners and our viewers going forward. And by the way, we are supporting a GoFundMe page for Sergeant Erik Duran, which, folks, you can find the link on all our social media pages. So before we wrap up, if you haven't already, do me a favor and hit that subscribe or follow button so you don't miss any of the future Batcave action. We're on YouTube, Spotify, all the usual spots. Just search Pat Brosnan live from the Batcave and you will find us. And hey, leave a quick review or rating while you're there. Really helps us grow the show so we can keep bringing you the best guests like Thomas Gerard Cassione and straight talk you won't hear anywhere else. Facts, focus, and forensic precision. Appreciate all the support. And Tom, great.
Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. I salute you as always. You're not just a Renaissance man and a legendary prosecutor and defense counsel, but so many other things, including your son up there at Harvard. Unreal. So, Tommy, amazing stuff. Keep up all the great work. Folks, Pat Brosnan, live for the Batcave. I'm signing out. We'll see you next week, and stay tuned.